Now I'm coming to the knowledge transfers from India to China. A large number of Sanskrit manuscripts were carried to China either by Chinese scholars or by Indian scholars hired by Chinese kings. So we spoke earlier about Yuan Sang and Yi Jing. Those were the scholars who came from China to India. But actually from India also a large number of scholars, Sanskrit scholars, went to China. And they lived for long years there translating, because for the Chinese it was considered to be a very important job to get the Sanskrit works translated into Chinese as quickly as possible, as many as possible. So you can literally fill a whole book with the works of translation done by the professors. So the first two who went to China were Kashyapa Matanga and Dharmaratna. So they made a very difficult journey. They went across Chinese Turkestan, Gobi Desert, and again they had a very difficult journey, and on top of that they had to learn Chinese, which had a totally different syntax from Sanskrit, but they did it. And when they did it, it was like they started a deluge. Oh, so many scholars followed them. Sangavarma, Dharma Satya, Dharma Kala, Mahabala, Vigna, Dharma Phala, a whole lot of them. I could not fit them all here. And they were not just from northern India. For example, Dharma Ruchi was a scholar from southern India. He went to China, lived there for 20 years, and he translated 53 works into Chinese. So there was, people knew that, there is a demand for them in China. So if they were not happy with what they were getting in India, they would move to China. It was not always a happy outcome, because this poor fellow called Dharmakshema was being wooed by two Chinese kings, and in the crossfire he got shot by an assassin. This happened with some other scholars as well. Amogha Vajra was another scholar. He collected 500 texts from different parts of India and went to China. And he got many titles from Chinese kings. And he is called the founder of the Tantric Buddhism. And he had there's another incident with him. When he translated, he spent years and years translating. The poor fellow took leave to go back to India. The moment he stepped foot in India, he got a message that he needs to go back because the Chinese king wants him back. And without seeing his family, he had to go back. Indian astronomers and mathematicians from the best universities held high positions in China's scientific establishments. A big example is Gautama Siddha. So his Chinese name was Kutan Siddha. One of the reasons why you would probably not know who was an Indian professor in China is that their names would be changed. They would have a Chinese name. So that's why we probably don't know all the Indians who went to China. Kutan Siddha he was called, and he became president of China's official board of astronomy in the 8th century. He translated Navagraha calendar to Chinese. He introduced Indian numerals to China. And the invention of printing press is attributed to Buddhist scholars who went from India to China. Today we know that printing was invented in China, but the work was done by Buddhist scholars who went from India. And printing was used as a means to spread Buddhist thought. This is a statue of Kumar Rajeeva. Not many of us have heard about him, but he's well known in China. Kumar Rajeeva, he basically grew up in Kashmir and Kocha, and he translated more than 100 Sanskrit works which are considered masterpieces of Chinese literature. The Diamond Sutra, which is a very valuable work in Buddhism, was translated by him. And this statue is in Xinjiang in China. He was like he was considered a very brilliant person by the Chinese, and so they have honored him, but we don't know anything about him. Then I come to the knowledge transfers from India to Greece, Islamic world and Europe. I've covered China, now I'm talking about the Islamic world and Europe. In this, Dr. Raj Vedam of IHAR has done a lot of work. So there was a thriving trade between India and the Western Asia, the rest of the world, in spices and textiles, but also in medicines. Not people know that medicines also were being continuously supplied by India, herbs, medicines. So Raj has laid out the trajectory by which Ayurveda was transmitted out of India. So this Rishi Kannada, he speaks about Rishi Kannada, who wrote important works in Vaisheshika, the Vaisheshika school of Indian philosophy, who influenced Democritus, because Democritus's ideas seem very similar to what Kannada wrote. Democritus' student was Hippocrates, who is called the father of Western medicine. So we can see where Hippocrates got his ideas, because if you see the Charaka Samhita, you will see that there is something called an oath that a doctor has to take before he is considered a Vaidya. And that is very similar to the Hippocratic oath. So, and of course, Charaka came much before Hippocrates. So the link would be Democritus. Raj has also spoken about the Library of Alexandria. So this library played a very important role in transferring works from east to west. It was located in such a place that, and they were the administrators of this library, went to any extent, beg, borrow, steal, to get the most authentic manuscripts from wherever they could get the best manuscripts. And so they got a lot of manuscripts from India, and probably that's how that also served as a route for translations to Latin and other languages. In the earlier years of Islam, when the Abbasid caliphs were ruling in Baghdad, that is a time when a number of translations happened. For example, Manka, who was in the court of the fifth Abbasid caliph, Harun Rashid, I think he was called, he translated Sushruta Samhita to Persian. The Indian scholars were often invited to Baghdad. So, you know, the works, the famous works of Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, Al-Farghani, Al-Tabai, Al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi is called the father of algebra. But they all acknowledged that they got knowledge from India. They have actually referred to the books that they got from India. But for some reason, all these works are now attributed to Arabs or Europeans. But you can trace it back to India. So while the Islamic scholars often credited their knowledge to Indic sources, the European scholars frequently plagiarized from Arabic texts without references. The Renaissance was propelled by the works of Arabic scholars, which was passed off as original works by Europeans. So the Renaissance, actually, all of a sudden these works were attributed to European scientists and scholars, but they were actually all translations of Arabic texts. And where did those Arabic texts come from? They came from India. And one important link is Toledo School of Translators. Toledo in Spain, when it was run over by the Christians. So that's the time they established a school which would spend they put an army of scholars whose only job was to translate Arabic works to Latin. So in the 12th and 13th centuries, you will find a whole lot of Arabic works translated to Latin. And even in the Latin that they use, you can see Arabic, so you can make out where it came from. They couldn't just find the word for it in Latin, so they let it be in Arabic. This is a statue of Garcia de Orta. He was a Portuguese who settled in Goa in 1538, another big source of knowledge transfer. He collected a lot of information about medicines, Ayurvedic medicines, and he wrote this book, Colloquios dos simples e drogas e cosas medicinas da India. So in which he listed all the herbs that Indians are using for various diseases, and he said this can be used for this, and this influenced later works of medicine in Europe.